Dead Space. A game so scarring it made the idea of being in space with aliens scary again. It was the game that posed the question, what's more effective on a freaky horrible alien? An actual gun used to kill things, or a laser saw? Dead Space is a horror game unlike any other. Despite being inspired by another survival horror game Great, it managed to take on a life of its own. Dead Space has one of the best horror atmospheres to date. Visceral Games spent countless hours perfecting every inch of the Ishimura, turning it into a space mechanic's worst nightmare. The surface level gore is enough to make your skin crawl, but what really gets you is the subtler elements, like alien symbols being scribbled on walls, the mechanical sounds of the ship mixed with the distant growls of unseen enemies, and the faint whispers echoing around you. The visual storytelling of Dead Space is some of the best in gaming. Seeing what little life is left on board the ship completely transformed into mentally broken shells really is disturbing, and amplifies just how dire the situation on board the Ishimura is. Dead Space also completely flipped the zombie motif of headshots being the best way to kill zombies, as these pointy freaks can only be killed by chopping off their limbs. The main story follows engineer Isaac Clarke as he visits the Ishimura on a repair mission with his crew, but the real reason he is there is to find his girlfriend Nicole, putting him into a specific character type known simply as bloke who is looking for his wife/GF while fighting freaky monsters, and a surprising amount of video game characters actually fit into this role.
Join the club, we've got jackets.
You could use a whole variety of words to describe Dead Space: haunting, depressing, exciting, gross. But apart from being a survival horror masterpiece, it also taught gamers a lot of valuable life lessons, like never walk past a dead body unless loot falls out of it, always read your girlfriend's text to the end so you don't miss any necessary information, never get too brave when fighting freaky aliens because right around the corner there's an even freakier alien, and blue visors are badass. For many people it would be hard to follow up such a masterfully crafted video game that not only delivered great scares, but had a great story, great characters, great combat, great music, great sound design, just great everything, except these armless jelly babies, they can burn in hell. How will Visceral Games and Glenn Schofield ever top this? Alright, Dead Space 2 is one of the greatest sequels to a game ever. Anyone who's played the game knows just how good this game is, and how it does a good job of not just expanding the world of Dead Space, but it also took a silent protagonist and made him into one of the most interesting characters in video game history, with lots of layers. After the events of the original Dead Space, getting betrayed by Kendra, finding out his GF died, and fighting a giant hentai monster, we get a closer look into the psychology of Isaac Clarke. His experiences on the Ishimura took a very heavy toll on his mind, which, let's be honest, there's no surprise there. Some of the shit he was seeing, I'm sure everyone would have nightmares. And the story in Dead Space 2 revolves around Isaac and his messed up brain, going deeper into the relationship between Isaac and the marker. Dead Space 2 takes the components from the first game and expands on them significantly, making the whole experience larger in scale. Visceral Games really wanted to double down on everything that made the first game so special. Though the original Dead Space is special thanks to its core horror elements and stress-inducing combat, the sequel gave the studio a lot more freedom to branch out and try different things. At first glance, both games look similar, but after a while you start to notice that Dead Space 2 is that little bit slicker, tighter, funner, and deeper, and this video is going to talk about how Dead Space 2 is the perfect sequel.
What?
One of the most memorable elements of the first Dead Space is its harrowing story of just a normal guy trying to find his girlfriend on board a spaceship that is crawling with some of the creepiest alien bastards ever seen in gaming. The subplot of the game was that you and your team of red shirts went to the Ishimura to repair it, but the subplot has you trying to find a way off the ship, but then the subplot has you put the marker back where it came from. The main thing everyone takes away from Dead Space's story, besides Hammond's shiny head, is the tragic tale of Isaac and Nicole. The whole game, we as Isaac are determined to find Nicole. Every so often you get a hint that Nicole is on the ship somewhere.
Isaac, where are you? It's me, Nicole.
And like a carrot to a mule, Isaac goes running. Of course, at the end of the game it's revealed by Kendra that Nicole was never really there. Isaac basically got catfished by the marker wearing his dead GF's face. The marker is the main driving force of the Dead Space universe. It holds a great significance within the narrative of every Dead Space game. Unitologists worship it like a god, though it isn't made explicitly clear why in the first game, but Dead Space 2 sheds light on this bizarre alien artifact, and its entourage of nutjob followers. The story begins with Isaac tied in a straitjacket and being spoken to by a man with two big front teeth like a rabbit. This guy is quizzing Isaac on what happened to him while he was on board the Ishimura, and to everyone's surprise,
I found something.
He talks. Yes, Isaac is no longer non-verbal while occasionally grunting, as he is now fully voice acted by Gunnar Wright. This is already a big contrast when compared to the original, but I'll talk more about it later. Isaac explains what he saw on board the Ishimura, and the experience is clearly still festering within his mind, which is embodied by this horrific hallucination of Nicole.
Isaac, can you hear me?
Isaac awakes from his nightmare in some kind of psychiatric wing of a hospital. This bloke called Franco has come to rescue Isaac, which taken out of context makes him seem like quite a nice guy, but according to some external lore, Franco is a naughty little bastard. Well, at least he's saving Isaac now. Maybe he can start his redemption arc.
You're in terrible danger.
Oh, never mind. Franco switches teams and the game throws you straight into the deep end, forcing you to run for your life while avoiding necromorphs, just like in the original, but this time around there's a QTE. After making your escape, you run into Mr. Big Teeth, who decides to jump scare you. Luckily, he does have a change of heart and decide to help you before he removes himself from the game, shall we say. At this point, Isaac gets in touch with a woman called Dana, who wants to save Isaac, who is still unaware of where he is. Dana explains to Isaac that he has amnesia, which was brought on by the marker signal, and he's been locked up in that crappy old psych ward for 3 years. The psych ward isn't on some tiny little ship like the Ishimura, but a full-blown space station, the Sprawl, and another necromorph outbreak has happened, sending the entire place into disarray, and for some reason the overseer for the station, Tideman, wants you and the other patients from the asylum dead. You eventually meet up with one of the other patients called Stross. Much like Isaac, the influence of the marker has driven him to insanity, causing him to see his late wife and son, who it's implied he murdered. Tideman used these subjects to recreate a marker on board the station. Yep, even Isaac had his brain probed in order to build it. The first Dead Space did a great job at making you ask questions. It plants seeds in your mind that make the world so bizarre. What does planet cracking mean? What's a unitologist? Why is there floating babies in water tanks? Audio and text logs were there to help flesh out the world, but they more added fuel to the fire rather than outright answer questions. Visceral games could have gone the route of keeping everything a secret again, but then the sequel would have just felt like a rehash of the original, rather than a strong continuation. I think everyone agrees that they made the right decision to use this game to tell a more in-depth story and build on some much-needed lore. Dead Space 2 explores the idea of unitology a lot more, whereas it was only in the background of Dead Space's story. In number 2, we get to see the true influence of this cult-like organisation. Dead Space 2 also gives more information on the power dynamic in the universe. While Dead Space 2 is a survival horror first and foremost about killing freaky aliens, it becomes clear that necromorphs aren't the only thing to fear in this universe. Big corporations like EarthGov, the Church, and the CEC all seem to worm their way into everything in this game. You won't find a local coffee shop around here. Everything is under the control of megacorps. The Ishimura was a mining vessel, and because of that, most of the locations you visit all relate to one another. That's not me slagging off the layout of Dead Space. It all made sense in the context of the game, but the Sprawl gives so much insight into how people live their lives in a space station in the year 25... whenever the fuck. Everywhere you visit feels so uniquely different from the last place, whether that's the shopping district, the school, the church, or the mines. It really adds so many layers to this world, and how spacefaring people would live in a universe like this. It really makes you think that if this place is pretty eerie anyway without necromorphs, imagine how bad Earth must have been to convince these people to go, nah, fuck it, we're living on a space station. The sheer scale of Titan meant Visceral Games could get creative with the amount of locations and designs they could throw at the player. Not everything had to be a dingy corridor or a scary mining deck with hissing pipes or flashing orange lights. Like I said, Dead Space 1 already did this, and to just do it again without adding anything new into the mix wouldn't have been fun. These new areas I mentioned, like the school, church, and even an updated version of the Ishimura, all do things their own way. Some areas are shrouded in darkness, others use light to unsettle the player, some areas are bright and still manage to creep you out. Visceral Games understood how important lighting was to making the game scary, and even had their own dedicated lighters, which were employees whose sole purpose it was to make the lighting as scary and effective as possible. There's so much different personality to the light now. Instead of just orange, you've got red lights, blue lights, purple lights. There's so much more variety to all of the stylistic elements of the first game that keeps the formula engaging. But let's be real, this wouldn't be a Dead Space game without dingy corridors, flashing orange lights, and the occasional environmental jump scare. The visuals are top notch. Even to this day, every blood-stained carpet, gloopy wall, and Isaac's pissed pants all look amazing. You can't make a good Dead Space game without amazing sound design. That should be the bare minimum when making one of these games, and Dead Space 2 nails its sound design. The sound design of Dead Space stays pretty consistent throughout the entire game. The same types of sounds pop up throughout the whole of the Ishimura, which makes sense, as again the sound matches the setting, which in this case was a creepy-ass spaceship. But this time around, it's a creepy-ass space station, which means there's a lot more range change to the sounds that are used. Since the necromorph outbreak has only really just started at the beginning of the game, we get to see first-hand order break down on board the Sprawl. There's a lot of initial screaming at the forefront of the sound, especially during the action sequences, but then when things start to calm down, the more haunting sounds take the lead. You get the standard echoing screams and growls that show off just how massive the Sprawl really is. When walking past living quarters, you can listen in on unfortunate survivors who thought locking themselves inside their homes would be safe. Whereas the first game had a lot of sounds that would be pretty scary on their own anyway, Dead Space 2 has a lot of sounds that on their own aren't so bad. Out of context, they could be used in all sorts of games, but when putting them in the context of Dead Space 2, they are downright terrifying. It's kind of like when they put Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in the first game. In the context of the game, that song is so disturbing, and Dead Space 2 feels like Visceral Games wanted to take this concept of juxtaposing sounds even further. You'll hear things like music boxes, announcements over speakers, billboards blaring out the latest products, and school intercoms. Dead Space 2 still has your typical scary sounds. Hissing pipes, loud as shit machinery, and faint whispering in your ears all take effect in this game, and once again put pressure on you in tense situations. It's no wonder Isaac cracked after hearing all this scary shit in the first game, and it's obviously not just the sounds that made him crack. Dead Space has some of the most insane enemy designs in gaming. The necromorphs were a brand new take on your typical zombies found in typical survival horror games. A big aspect of the necromorphs is that headshots do fuck all, well except to the ones that are literally just heads. Dismembering enemies is the most effective way of killing them, unless you want to piss away all your ammo. Necromorphs come in all kinds of disgusting flavours, all with unique attacks and kill animations. The fact that there's so many different types means you have to adapt the way you fight each one, encouraging you to try different weapons. The tools at Isaac's disposal are so satisfying to use too, thanks in part to the sound design of the weapons, and the sheer carnage they leave behind after you're done with an enemy. Isaac's profession as an engineer helped him out a great deal in the first game, as it gave him access to many overpowered tools like telekinesis and stasis that he could use to manipulate the environment and deal with enemies easier. It's elements like this that help Dead Space feel fresh. Dead Space 2 once again took these gameplay mechanics and evolved them. Aiming feels a lot smoother, making it feel better when tracking particularly fast enemies, and certain weapons have had their alt modes changed to make them more useful. The sequel introduces a whole bunch of new necromorphs to send your blood pressure through the roof. You've got acid spitting ones, raptor ones that charge at you, horrible nipple looking buggers that squirt shit at you, feral children that are hopped up on monster energy, and babies that act as living landmines.
Oh god. Oh, that poor kid. That poor woman.
This game also introduces one of the deadliest Dead Space enemies to date, which is of course glass windows. Seriously, these things are dangerous. Standard necromorph types pop up everywhere, and old familiar faces make cameos. Seeing some of these crazy bastards again is like meeting up with an old friend that you never wanted to see again. Since there's so many more enemies this time around, and they're pretty aggressive, you tend to burn through ammo a lot quicker. Luckily, telekinesis has been tweaked to let you throw poles and bits of necromorphs back at necromorphs. It adds a whole new layer to the already twisted yet fun combat of Dead Space. Dead Space 1 could be excused for its janky combat at times, because it was carried by its atmosphere. It was unlike anything people had experienced at the time, but Dead Space 2 gave the team the chance to tighten it up. They didn't feel the need to change it too much, but there is one aspect they changed quite a bit.
Isaac!
The biggest deviation from the first game is that Isaac is now a fully voice-acted character, and this one inclusion completely changes the game's dynamic with the player. In the original game, Isaac is mute, letting the rest of the cast do the talking for him. He is a vessel for the player to inhabit, to experience the scares of the Ishimura, and get invested in the atmosphere. While he has no speaking lines in the game, Visceral still managed to give him a little bit of character through his groans, fast heart rate, and yells. It makes him feel grounded in a world full of nightmare fuel, and allows the player to slip into Isaac's shoes more easily, plus feel bad for him because he's looking for his dead girlfriend. Dead Space 2 could have gone for this approach as well, having the player become Isaac and experience the new scares and be a passenger in the story once again, but then it would just feel like a rehash. Having a sequel so similar to the first would feel pointless, and Visceral Games knew this. Having Isaac speak in the second game opened up the possibility of something very special for Isaac. It meant that he could go on a character arc. Dead Space 2 tackles Isaac's psyche and how the marker has essentially embedded itself in Isaac. Whereas Isaac was once a vessel for us to inhabit, he is now a vessel for the marker to inhabit.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
And it continues its quest of haunting Isaac by embodying itself as a freaky version of Nicole. In Dead Space 2, Isaac is thrust into a story that he never asked to be a part of, but after the Ishimura incident, he becomes both the problem and the solution. Dead Space 2 really brings Isaac into the circle of heroic protagonists. In the first game, he's just a normal guy trying to save himself, his friends, and his girlfriend, and unfortunately fails at most of those things. Dead Space 2 showcases Isaac's guilt over what happened, and Gunnar Wright captures this perfectly. Isaac Isaac's back and forths with Nicole really emphasises just how broken he is. At the start of the game, Isaac seems to have given up on everything. After witnessing such horrors in the first game and finding out the truth about Nicole, he kind of feels hollow, like a guy who has nothing left to lose. It makes you really feel sorry for Isaac, and everything keeps going wrong for him. You feel like the final straw for him is when Dana betrays him, culminating in this line.
Why can't everyone just leave me alone, huh?
Poor guy's lost all hope. His only chance of escape was a lie. Everyone around him is dying, the leader of the station is trying to kill him, and his only ally is a guy whose mind has been completely fried by the marker. Things are looking pretty bleak for Isaac. Until he finds Ellie. Isaac bumps into the only other survivor on the Sprawl, who is smart enough to pick up a weapon. Ellie is a little untrusting of Isaac at first, since he's covered in blood and guts, but decides to help him open a door to the transport hub. Stross has convinced Isaac that the marker can be stopped, but they need to get to the government sector first, which means Isaac has to wade through waves of messed up monsters. Ellie gets back in contact with Isaac and tells him that she's found Stross, and that he won't stop going on about the steps.
This is step one!
Isaac begs Ellie not to shoot him, as he needs Stross to put a stop to the necromorphs. The trio eventually meet up, but Stross's condition is worsening. The gang board a tram and head to the government sector, but not before making a trip past the Ishimura. The fact the Ishimura feels so small in this game really emphasises just how big in scope Dead Space 2 is. Good thing you don't have to board it in this game.
Last time I was here, things didn't go so well.
Oh, never mind. Needless to say, this unnerves Isaac, and makes his hallucinations even more potent. You feel bad for Isaac in the first game, but you really feel sorry for him in the second game. He's not a super cop, or an augmented soldier, or a demigod. He's just a middle-aged engineer with anxiety. Bro probably has to take medication for his back. After using the Ishimura to align the tracks for the tram, Isaac launches an escape pod to reunite with Stross and Ellie, but Stross's condition has worsened even more, causing him to attack Ellie. After fighting his way through the mines, Isaac runs into Stross again, who has taken out one of Ellie's eyes.
Oh God. Ellie, step 3.
Stross eventually decides to comfort Isaac himself, telling him to speak to her, which is probably his dead wife. Everyone affected by the marker sees dead relatives. For Isaac it's Nicole, for Kendra it was her brother, and for Stross it's his wife and kid. After spamming E for ages, you put Stross out of his misery. The torment of everything that's happened becomes too much for Isaac, which eventually culminates in a character-defining interaction with evil Nicole.
Cause you are my everything. And if I let you go, I've got nothing left.
Step 4. Acceptance.
The game keeps hammering home these steps Isaac must take in order to make things right, and up until this point it's just a bit confusing. But once Isaac acknowledges his guilt for not being able to save Nicole, he understands what he has to do. He reunites with One-Eyed Ellie, and the two commandeer a big drill and use it to mine through a big gloopy mess, and into the government sector. After walking around for a bit, Ellie finds a working gunship so the pair can escape the facility, but Isaac, not wanting history to repeat itself, makes a tough call.
Closing hatch.
Oh. Hey, Isaac, what are you doing?
Gunship command override confirmed.
Isaac, what are you doing? Open the door right now.
Emergency launch cycle initiated.
No.
Airlock
No, no, don't you dare. Don't you dare launch the ship. Isaac.
It's your best chance, Ellie. You got life support, comms. Hey, you gotta be rescued.
You bastard.
I need you to be rescued. I couldn't save Nicole, but I can save you, Ellie. So, bye.
This game has such good character moments. You could make the argument that the first game is scarier than the second, and fair enough, but Dead Space 2's story is so good. Now that he's actually managed to rescue someone, he accepts his fate and gets ready to finish what he started. Fighting his way through the facility, Isaac stumbles upon the marker he helped build, and it's fucking massive.
Oh my God. I built that.
The necromorphs that broke into the facility begin swarming the marker, which causes a convergence event. Nicole guides Isaac to a room that will help him remember how to destroy the marker, which means he has to lie down in a machine and play one of the most anxiety-inducing minigames in gaming history. I guess that's why Stross was so obsessed with sticking things in people's eyes. The needle breaks Isaac out of the Matrix, restores his memory, and prepares him for the fight of his life, which boils down to fighting a half-dead Tideman, getting betrayed by Nicole, fighting demons in his own brain, and eventually destroying the marker and the facility. The finale is bittersweet. Though Isaac managed to overcome every adversity put in front of him, there's nowhere left to run. Taking one last look around, he accepts his fate and waits for the inevitable to happen, and we are left to speculate on what happens to Isaac next. Dead Space 2 is a game— just kidding, Ellie comes to the rescue and saves him. Visceral Games could have ended the game on a bleak note, it wouldn't have felt out of place, but Isaac was due a win for once. And besides, how else were EA supposed to milk this franchise if the main guy's dead? Dead Space 2 should be used as a blueprint for developers to follow on how to craft a sequel. The fact the game feels so close yet so far away from the first Dead Space is really impressive. It's familiar yet different. It's terrifying yet heartfelt. It gives so much back to the fans and has so many great qualities that it's easy to look past the few shortcomings it has. Yeah, the game has some issues. The suits don't look as cool in this one, bar the vintage suit. They're too streamlined and look like they offer up less protection than a pound store condom. The door hacking segments feel a bit tedious and just slow the pace of the game down. Honestly, it just seems like they were added to make the Stross jump scare possible, and I could have done without the QTEs. Those are such small minute details in Dead Space 2 that you can just brush aside, because everything else is so good. And if we're actually never getting a Dead Space 2 remake, I'll build a marker of my own and mail it to EA HQ.